Pivot tables are used when you want to aggregate data. They are much more flexible than the subtotal function or using the total row function in a data table. You can manipulate the data much easier with pivot tables. One note is that you cannot create a pivot table based on data that has subtotals already applied. So what we want to do with this data, which is real estate data, we want to look at the city and pull in some data to aggregate it by city. So we have the houses that were sold for the real estate data. The address of the house, the city, the real estate agent, the price we asked for the house and for which we sold the house. We sold this one for less than we were asking, so the percent that the selling price is of the asking is less than 100. Where, for example, we sold this one higher than what we were asking, so the percent of asking price is over 100%. This is when we listed the house for sale and the date on which we sold the house. So the days on the market is the difference between those, and that basically means how long it took to sell the house. So again, we want to look at the asking price, selling price, percent of asking price, and days on the market for each city. And what we want to do is find the averages of those, because it doesn't really make sense, for example, to find the total of the percent of asking price or really the days on the market. Those don't make sense to total or use a sum function. All right, so let's create a pivot table, and I'm going to click anywhere in the data, or you can highlight the data. Go to Insert Pivot Table. It assumes the range you want to use. If you haven't highlighted it and that's correct, we want to place the pivot table on a new worksheet, and we'll ignore this for now. That's a different topic for the data models. It creates a new sheet that has the area where the pivot table will be created, and it has the pivot table field pane on the right hand side. Notice that it also has a pivot table analyze tab and a design tab. I'm going to go ahead to the pivot table name and call this city sales. Notice when I click outside of this pivot table area that those tabs go away and that field pane goes away. So I'll click in that area, and let's start creating our pivot table. We know we want the field city, so I'll click that, and you can see it automatically starts to create the table. It assumes that you want each city on a row. We also want to use the asking price, selling price, percent of asking price, and the days on the market. You can see that it adds those down here to the values pane. The columns is a little bit different. It's going to use the values of these as the body of the table. And I'll show you in a little bit what happens if you drag and drop some of those into different areas. You can see that it's included all of the data. Now we want these to be the averages. So I'm going to click anywhere in this field, and under the Analyze there's Field Settings. And you can change the name of the column here. I'm going to change this to average and go to the number format and change it to currency. I'll do the same thing for this field. The percent of asking price, again, doesn't make sense to add that whole column because this 76 doesn't really tell us a lot. We'll go to the average, and we're going to format that as percentage, and I'll leave the 2 decimal places. And the average for the days on market, and it should just be a general number. I'll include that with no decimal places. So when you do that, it automatically changes this from sum to average. And if we want the row label here, it's text. So all we have to do is type the heading and press enter. And therefore you have your column name. So if we go to the Design tab, we can choose any type of design that we would like for the table. The banded rows and columns will add either shading to the table, or depending on the style, it will add the lines between the columns and the rows. So it just depends on which one you choose as to whether it will add the lines between or the shading. You have options here for your subtotals, the grand totals at the bottom, report layouts, and so forth. So you've got some different options there for the design. I want to go in and edit this table a little bit. Let's go in and just play around with some of these items. Let's say I want to see the numbers by selling agent. If I click on selling agent, or I can drag any of these fields from here down to the bottom panes, you can see for each city it has listed the agents and their average numbers for each agent. What I can do is take the selling agent and add it to the columns. And now you can see for each column we have the name of the selling agent, and we have that for each of the fields, the selling price, asking price, and so forth. So that's really busy. If I don't want all of that to show, I can remove the percent of asking price and the days on the market. And let's just say I don't want to see the asking price. That cleans up the data a little bit to where I don't have as many columns to view. And it automatically includes the grand total here. The other thing I would like to mention is that a lot of times the columns are a little tricky. You would think that maybe if I wanted to add the asking price, I would add it as a column. But when I do that, it's going to show me all the values for the asking price column. So it's as many columns as I have rows of data. So we don't want to do that. We would include that down here and just drag it to the bottom, and that way it would aggregate that data. We could do that for the selling agent, and again, it would aggregate the data for each selling agent, and then you could drag that to rows, and then you get the data in this format. So really the best way to work with pivot tables is to just play around with the fields and putting them into different panes. You can filter the data as well, and sort it from the drop down here for this city. You can play around with the filters and see what that will do as well.